AWS Loft Talks.
Mark Lowe with CloudPassage. I am the Cloud Security Evangelist over there. And my talk is going to be about enabling DevSecOps through Agile security. Let's start off with a quote from Charles Darwin. It's not the strongest and the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best manage change. So as you can tell, AWS has definitely disrupted what data centers are, right? Everybody's using it. And what that means is that it's transforming what people are doing with data centers and how it works, right? Everything's software defined now, everything's instant, everything's like, you can bring up many, many servers up and down very quickly and set up environments where it usually take, months, maybe even like almost half a year. So what we're talking about, we started off with bare metal servers, then we moved off to traditional virtualizations, VMware. Then we're talking about, IT as a service, infrastructure as a service. Again, Amazon kind of does that, provisioning. And then moving on to hybrid type clouds, right? So that's kind of the future, what we see at CloudPassage is everybody moving to a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, things like that. All that means is that it enables business agility, speed, and efficiency, right? Faster, continuous deployment, agile, all those type of methodologies. Just kind of some numbers. It's like, as you can tell, cloud's the future. Again, what we see again is multi-cloud. That is going to be the future. You kind of see the growth. 25% public, private's 35%, hybrid's 50%. You can see all the money that's being spent at it. So what that means is that cloud adoption fundamentally breaks traditional security. So what are the challenges? If I am a security architect and I've got a DevOps team, an architecture team, and I've built out an environment that's continuously developing, continuous deployment, continuously moving very quickly, right? How do I operate in that environment? How do I keep up? If I'm a cloud architect and I've developed this environment, what do I worry about? I worry about my security department breaking it, right? I want to be able to release as quickly as I want, develop as quickly as I want, but my security can't keep up. What do I do about that? Do I just forget about security? Or do I just move on? Do I get popped? Cost millions and millions of dollars? If I'm worried about compliance and GRC, and I'm a large corporation, I'm in multiple different environments. I got bare metal servers, traditional virtualization, I'm in Amazon, I'm in hybrid cloud. How do I get visibility across that whole infrastructure to make sure I'm following the rules for PCI, for HIPAA, SOC 2, moving on to government, for FISMA? How do I do that? Everybody's familiar with DevOps, right? That's kind of what's evolving today. Pretty much everybody has a DevOps team. CloudPassage has a DevOps team. What does that mean, right? So DevOps, we're combining basically the development team and the operations team, right? We're using Agile methodology. Everybody's pretty much used to the 2-week sprint, daily scrums, right? And at that point, some companies are continuously deploying. Some people are deploying almost 10 times a day. CloudPassage, we release 3 times a month typically, right? Continuing faster and faster all the time. You're using cloud environments like AWS. Again, you're disengaging from the hardware where basically your environment, your data center is unlimited, right? You can spin up anything as quickly as possible as you want. People are using Chef, Puppet, they're using OpsWorks, they're using CloudFormation, everything's automated. Again, all that configuration is being done, no longer manual scripts, so it's all automated. And you can scale very quickly, right? If I'm a retail environment and I need to spin up 10,000 servers, I've got a Black Friday sale, I can do that. But I have to pay for the whole year. So again, everything's very quickly, moving into those environments. So what happens is that now, traditional security, where typically you go through a development cycle, you're testing your QA, then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, I have to add security on top of that. It doesn't work anymore, right? If I want to deploy right away, you got to do it right away. So DevSecOps, it's not a group. A lot of people think it's another security group. It's really a process, right? It really starts at the development stage. And what that means is that security becomes a responsibility for everybody. Right? It becomes a responsibility for developers, for the operations team, all the way through to management, who have to, you have to have penalties if you're not adding and following security practices all the way through. That's the only way it works, right? Continuously scanning and fixing security issues, right? So when I was a kid and I was in college, I wasn't the best student in the world. I used to be the master of the procrastination of taking tests, right? Pulling through, looking at the bold print, pulling other people's notes. And then my parents said, basically, if you get straight A's for a semester, I'll give you a car. So I went to class every day, did all my homework. By the time finals came, boom, I didn't even have to study. Got straight A's right away and didn't have to bother to study for my finals. It's the same thing here. If you start catching things at the development cycle through testing, QA, UAT, you don't have to worry about pushing it into production. When that release is ready, security is already built in. You push it out right away, right? So that's what DevSecOps is. It's that process. With DevSecOps, it changes what security is, right? You no longer use that traditional approach that you're typically using. You have to use an Agile security approach, and that's what we're talking about today. There's a lot of security solutions out there, especially trying to be cloud forward. And there's several different ways of applying these solutions, right? So a lot of people use agents. And when people think agents, there's a lot of agents out there, they think antivirus. That thing is going to consume a lot of my CPU. It's just going to eat that up, drill it down. Everybody's used to the Windows back in the day. When that scan happens, you're basically going to lunch, right? You're not doing anything. It requires a lot of updates to that agent, right? So that type of solution makes it very difficult, and people just don't like agents. There's virtual appliances, right? So, you got your advanced firewalls that's got hardware appliances. You've got your WAFs, your NIDs, all those things you stick in a data center. You're used to doing that. But what happens there is you've got specific ASICs, compute power. That machine, that appliance is made specifically for that software, for that embedded system, right? So that acceleration happens, you get a lot of throughput. You take that same system, try to move it to a virtual environment, and you spin up a generic VM, it's not going to get that throughput, right? So instead of one appliance, you're standing up 10, 15 appliances just to get that same throughput, right? And again, it's still that perimeter approach, that traditional security approach, where you're just worried about that north-south traffic, where if it can't get to me from the internet, I'm okay. And then there's hypervisor-based, right? So there's a lot of solutions out there. Obviously, it's not going to work in AWS. You're not going to tell AWS, by the way, I want to add something to your hypervisor. Just not going to happen. So it's useless in the public cloud. Also, there's a kind of misconception about hypervisor-based security. One, it takes up slots, right? So again, what we're talking about with DevOps and continuous deployment, Agile, it's all about getting more and more throughput. Everything is dollar-based. And what ends up happening with a hypervisor-based security is that it's taking up hypervisor slots, meaning that your density on that server goes down, right? So instead of 10 VMs you can stand on that same hardware, you're standing up only 4 or 5, right? That's all great until your CIO says my MBO is not going to be met. I'm not going to get paid my bonus. No, we're not doing that hypervisor solution, essentially, right? Everybody's used to this, right? Traditional security. We're talking about perimeter firewalls, NIDs, all those type of things that happen out there. You've got physical network segmentation. People are used to firewalls, physical firewalls that are separating out your development environment, your staging environment, your QA environment, your production environment. Uses like strong change controls, right? As well as dedicated security hardware we just talked about. That is what we're typically doing. That perimeter approach again, where I'm assuming that if it can't get to me from the internet, I'm okay. But the reality is that the north-south traffic that people are trying to protect against is roughly about 10% of the traffic typically in most organizations. About 90% of the traffic is actually east-west, right? So between your servers. So you know a guy for 20 years, you click on his link, when email you get, now you're infected, you VPN in, it's in now, right? Once it's in, how do you stop it? Certainly not without a perimeter approach. So a lot of APTs, zero-day attacks everybody's used to and seeing these days. That's not going to help with that north-south traffic. So we're talking about is Agile security, right? So Agile security, again, with AWS, you got the shared responsibility. They're going to take the hypervisor level down, and then you're responsible for the operating system level up, right? There's no natural perimeter, no physical network. They're trying to optimize their hardware. They want to get 99 plus 100% utilization of their CPU. Right? You can't do that if you segment things out physically. Elastic on demand, that's what the beauty of it is, right? I mean, that's why there's a lot of people doing kind of shadow IT. Hey, you know what? I talked to one organization that they outsource their IT. It takes them 187 days by the time they sign that paper to get that system up. That's your SLA, all right? You make any type of change, because you know what? I've changed my mind. I want to go from Windows to Linux. That 187 days resets. So you know what the developer does? They go in, they say, you know what? I can use a credit card, open up an account in Amazon. I'm good to go, right? And again, you can't have dedicated hardware sitting inside of Amazon. Security doesn't change though, right? Your critical objectives stay the same. You still need the visibility. You still have to have the ability to say, hey, what version of MySQL am I running? What version of SSH am I running? What operating systems are out there? Are my things configured correctly? still have to have strong access control, right? Username, password. If your password's password123, I wish you luck, right? So you got to have multi-factor authentication. RSA tokens, fastcode tokens, OTP SMSs, all that stuff is necessary in order to be able to take that next step to make sure your environment's secure. Vulnerability management, right? So again, everybody's heard of shell shock, heartbleed, venom. All these things that are happening today, they're finding, right? You need to be able to manage your vulnerabilities. You need to know what your exposure is. That's kind of the holy grail, right? So that's why we have compliances out there. HIPAA, protecting healthcare data. We're talking about PCI for cardholder data, all that stuff, your IP, right? So if you're stealing your IP, obviously a lot of governments are stealing information, data, right? So your data protection, again, is another tenet that you need to protect. Compromise management, right? So now you've detected something. What do? You be able to mitigate that, right? Now I realize I've got a compromised server. How do I figure that out? How to take forensics? How do I know what happens so I can take action so that it doesn't happen again? And then lastly, it's operational automation. Right? That is the thing, is that especially with DevOps, everything's got to be automated. That's why if you have to do anything manual in the process to add security as you're pushing out your releases, you've essentially broken what the cloud is and the kind of the nature and the essence of the cloud. Right? So these are the tenets that are out there, and these things don't change whether you're using a traditional data center or you're moving out into this new environment, to this new data center. So what we're talking essentially is built-in security, right? So that's kind of the realization everybody has to move to. Instead of looking at your applications from a location standpoint or location-centric view, you need to start looking at your applications or your security more at an application level, right? So you want to use and utilize Amazon for your web servers, but you don't quite trust the public cloud for whatever reason, so your databases are your private data center, right? How do I secure that environment? Right, so there's a lot of things like that. So security becomes built in, or we call it workload level security. A lot of it's micro-segmentation, you might have heard about that, right? So it's basically managing your host-based firewalls. It's more of a whitelisting model as opposed to the traditional firewall blacklisting. So what you're doing there is, unless there's an explicit rule written to allow that communication, I'm gonna disallow everything else, as opposed to a traditional firewall where you're saying, I'm not gonna allow all this stuff. Instant on. So server comes up, it's got to have security right away, right? So regardless if it's an Amazon EC2 Classic, which I'm not sure that's provided anymore, but VPC or whatever region it's in, right? Comes up, security's got to be in there right away. It can't be provisioned after the fact. It's got to be ultra lightweight, right? So we talked about agents, very, very heavy. You're worried about CPU. You're in Amazon, you're paying per hour for your server. The last thing you want to do is pay a penalty for security. You need to make sure the security that you're being provided isn't a burden on the current workload that you're using, right? SaaS-based, right? That's the way to go. You don't have to, again, moving forward, being very cloud-centric, you want to be SaaS-based. You don't want to stand up an environment for your security. You don't want to worry about updates. I want to be the latest out there, right? So SaaS-based. And then a comprehensive suite. There is no panacea or silver bullet for security. From RSA, that's where I was previously, as well as a company called IronKey. Everything's always been about layered security. Everything's always been about making sure that level is stacked up with a bunch of different features so that the ability to get in is very, very difficult. You got to set that bar very, very high, right? Nothing's foolproof, but if I've locked the front door, closed the garage, set my alarm, right, set the motion sensors inside, likely the criminal's not going to go after me. So everybody's familiar with this. And it's kind of what we talked about with the built-in security. Comes straight from the Amazon documentation. Talk about the shared security responsibility. They're going to be responsible for everything from the hypervisor level down. Right? They're going to make sure your data center is secure, power generation, et cetera, everything from that hypervisor level down. They're going to have compliances for SOC 2, FISMA, et cetera. Everything's compliant. Amazon is obviously the top player in this space. What they're not responsible for is the operating system level up, right? Again, they're not responsible for what you set for your passwords. They're not going to be responsible if you're not using certificates to get in through SSH. They're not responsible if you've decided not to patch your servers and somebody uses Heartbleed to get in, right? That is your responsibility. Some of the controls that we talk about in order to be able to manage and do what we call built-in or workload security, and essentially here, Agile security, we're talking about managing your host-based firewalls, right, and automating that, to be able to make sure what's coming in and out you're in full control of, right? You know who's speaking to who and what's going out, what ports, et cetera, et cetera. Again, multi-factor authentication, access to these servers. You need to add that extra level, right? Username and passwords. I came from a company over at IronKey where we did a QA machine that if you daisy chain these physical DM QA machines, they literally could do 500,000 passwords per second, right? So, and they start off obviously with the most common passwords. Configuration security monitoring. So it's no secret, it's a business now. People are just going after these servers and your information. Lowest common denominator. What they're gonna do is take the top 10 vulnerabilities out of OWASP and run these scripts. Hey, you know what? I know this IP address exists. I'm gonna run these scripts and see if I can get in. Right? So you need configuration security monitoring to make sure you're locking down and you're following best practices from organizations like CIS, NIST, and SANS. Right? So if you configure your server correctly for security, the chances of them trying to get in is pretty much negligible. So you need to lock down and make sure you're creating that golden image and you're following best practices. Vulnerability assessment, right? You need to continuously monitor these things. What's not patched? What is patched? When am I running? Right? You need to constantly know, how many of my servers have shell shock on it right now? What do I need to get out of this? File integrity monitoring. Been around a long, long time. Very, very strong. It's another tenet for security. You need to make sure critical kernel files are not being modified, registries are not being changed. Simple example of that would be like the set UID bit. If you're familiar with that, it's a bit that allows a file or a process to run as root without being root. Somebody taking advantage of that, right? So you need to monitor that to make sure it's not being modified. Account management, it's an easy one. You want to make sure things like your printer user is not being used to log in physically to a system. You want to make sure writes aren't being accelerated. You want to make sure you're pushing out, correct SSH keys. So these are kind of like some of the features or things you're going to be looking for to be able to do host-based kind of agile security. And what are we doing? We're locking down the framework, right? We're locking down the operating system level up. And some of those features we talked about the host-based firewall, locking down the operating system in and out, multi-factor authentication to access the actual workload. You want to harden out the operating system with CSM in the app framework. You want to make sure everything's patched correctly. You want to continuously monitor these things to make sure nobody's modifying them, right? So you want that host intrusion detection to make sure, like, somebody started a process that doesn't belong on my web server. Why? Somebody's opened up a port on one of my servers. Why? Somebody's turned off antivirus on my machines, as an example. Why? Right? And then obviously the data, that's kind of the holy grail. That's what you're trying to protect. You want to use encryption. You want to make sure what's being pushed out, all that stuff. So this is what we're talking about here, again, with built-in security, right? So you want to look for a solution that's going to protect that whole stack. So as you're pushing out these servers, again, you don't care what the environment it's on top of. You don't care if it's what the hypervisor is. It's protected as a fortress on its own at this level up. So what you're looking for in a security solution, right? These are 5 tenets, not stuff that I came up with. I wish I did. It actually came from Neil McDonald from Gartner, right? He came up and he says, these are the 5 things you should be looking at if you want a security solution for this next generation, basically Data Center. First is abstraction, right? You're not going to attach security to a hardware appliance. It kind of just breaks what you guys are doing today. Second thing is automation. I was going to put automate or die, but automator left behind. But you need to automate everything. And if it takes any manual intervention to add security, even as an afterthought, it's just not going to work. You're going to slow down, right? You need to start from the very beginning and automate the whole process all the way through as you're pushing out from production. Orchestration, right? You need to layer things. You can't just use one solution. There's no one solution that's going to solve all your problems. You want to have basically a platform that is going to layer a bunch of different things on top of each other. So again, you're raising that bar, right? So a quick example of that is I had a police officer, a good friend of mine, I said, hey, what's the point of having that club in the car, right? And he looks at it and he goes, well, I'll tell you what, the criminal, disable that thing in probably about 30 seconds. But if the car next to it doesn't have the club, I'm gonna steal that car anyways. That's 30 seconds I save, right? So you need to make sure that bar is extremely, extremely high. And you can only do that if you've got multiple features to layer on top of each other to raise that bar. Scalability, things go up and down very quick, right? I mean, again, that's the beauty of Amazon. I need 9,000 servers for 5 hours, 9,000 servers come up. I need to take those 8,000 servers down, 8,000 servers go down, right? Your traditional security just can't keep up. You gotta have that built-in instant-on security, and that's what you need today. And then the bigger thing is that at CloudPassage, we realized that there's a bigger ecosystem, right? So people are using SIMs, using GRCs. You want to open up something like a Jira, automatically open up a ticket. You have to have that API enablement in order to fit into what that ecosystem is, right? You have to have a strong REST API and be able to push in and fit into that security ecosystem, the whole ecosystem for your company, as opposed to trying to be the end-all, be-all of everything.
AWS Loft Talks.